right, my turn to say good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. There we go. It has to be official now. Okay. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 6. So if you want to turn to that, if you want to use the Bibles underneath the chairs, it's page 848. We've been looking at this book, which I think I mentioned. I don't know that I've ever done a series through the book of Hebrews before. I knew the basic idea, and hopefully you know it now, this idea that Jesus is better than. And specifically, the author, who is of Jewish origin, writing to Christians of Jewish origin, is saying Jesus is better than any of the Old Testament fixtures, elements, people. So far we've seen he's better than the prophets, the angels, Moses, the high priest. And the reason is, it seems that these Jewish Christians were considering abandoning their Christian faith and going back to Judaism, perhaps because of persecution by Jews. And some, there's definitely things he says, that some, they weren't totally abandoning it or thinking of that, but they basically stalled in their life as Christians. They'd reached a point and just had stopped. And we saw last week, you can't stay still. You're either moving forward or you're moving back. That's a fact of the Christian life. And so the author, he was about to go into detail about how Jesus is better than the Old Testament high priest. But then he realized, I can't get into that yet. Back in chapter 5, verse 11, he said, "About this we have much more to say, and it is hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing." He says, you're just not ready for this yet. You should be. And he chastises them for that. And he actually went on to warn about the danger of becoming complacent in their Christian life, let alone rejecting. And in chapter 6, verse 7, he says, "For the land that has drunk the rain that often falls on it and produces a crop useful to those for whose sake it is cultivated." So that's talking that land. There's a metaphor for people, for Christians, people who are in their Christian life living out their faith. He said that land, those people receive a blessing from God. But chapter 6, verse 8 said, "But if it bears, the land, thorns and thistles, it is worthless and near to being cursed, and its end is to be burned." And so he gives a very distinct warning. If you do not live out this, if your faith isn't genuine, we're going to see, and it comes up again today, we are saved by faith, not by works, but the faith that saves us will evidence itself in works. When we're faced with an opportunity to live out our faith, we live out that faith. And so after giving this warning, the author seeks to encourage his audience. And the application for us, as we start to think about this, and in this, always, it is not just the idea, let's learn Bible facts, but let's be changed by what the Bible says. The application for us, we're not really facing persecution of anything too serious for our faith, as far as I know in this room. But there are two extremes that incline Christians to pull back or stall in their life. One is persecution, but the other is just the opposite. It's comfort. It's when we're comfortable. We might not abandon our Christian faith, but we become content. We become complacent. And that's easy to do. But we saw, as I said, if we're not moving forward, we are regressing. And so we saw the warning last week, now the encouragement. Chapter 6, starting at verse 9. He says, "Though we speak in this way of warning, yet in your case, beloved, we feel sure of better things, things that belong to salvation. For God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and the love that you have shown for his name in serving the saints, as you still do. And we desire each one of you to show the same earnestness, to have the full assurance of hope until the end, so that you may not be sluggish, but imitators of those who, through faith and patience, inherit the promises." So he starts off, though we speak this way, and he's going back to the warning. I spoke very sternly, a word of warning and severe consequences. "Yet in your case, beloved, we feel sure of better things, things that belong to salvation." He's saying, I just warned about the two different types of land. I know you're that good land. That land that has, he says, the rain has fallen on it, and it's drunk in that rain, and it produces a crop. Now he says, "I feel sure." Does he know for sure? you have to wonder. I think he's being positive. It's a little bit like maybe when your kids go off to take a test and you say, I know you'll do well. You absolutely know they'll do well. Maybe so, but maybe some of it's just, I want to encourage you because, there's definitely a truth to prophetic praise. If we praise, it can come about. I think there's also an element of, he does feel sure for some of them, but others need to heed the warning. Others need to know, because he's going to say later in verse 11, we desire that each one of you. And I think he knows it's not true of each one of them. True of some, not of others, or he wouldn't be writing the book. And then verse 10 says, for God is not unjust so as to overlook your work and the love that you have shown for his name in serving the saints as you still do. So this was a wait a minute verse for me. It raised a possible misunderstanding. What would that be? For God is not unjust so as to overlook your work. How could you misunderstand that verse?
And it's a work-based.
It's works-based. He's looking at your works. Yeah, all right, you good enough to get into my heaven? Let me decide. Let me judge. Let me put you on the balance scale. You could easily take it that way. Well, how do you explain that then? If someone raised that question, how does this verse fit in with what we know overall?
That if you have faith in God, your life will produce good works, not to get you into heaven just because you are following what God says.
Right. If you have faith, it will lead to good works. Our salvation is based entirely on faith. But the faith that saves will result in good works. And so in some ways you can look at that and say there's a person who has that faith. And that's what he's saying. God will not overlook your work there. And he goes on to say, especially your love for the saints. Your love for the saints. In 1 John, it shows us how important it is to love each other. Let's see if we can get this one going there. We thought we found the trick last week. And now I don't know. I pushed the black button so many times, I don't know if I'm in the black, not in the black. 1 John says, 1 John 4, verse 20, if anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, whoever loves God must also love his brother. So it shows the importance of love, and love is a little bit like faith. If you have true faith, it will evidence itself in works, in actions, in tangible means. Well, the same thing for love. If I truly love you, there will be evidence of that. There will be actions that show that. And so that's what he's talking about here. God sees how your faith and your love evidence themselves. And he says God takes that into account. And then verse 11, he says, we desire that each one of you show the same earnestness to have the full assurance of hope until the end. Now here's that idea I said, each one of you, that the author's going to bring up. The Christian life, I make a point of this over and over. The Christian life is we and God, not me and God. Our American culture has this rugged individualism that we're so proud of, has turned it into me and God. And maybe I do it in the midst of other people, but it's still me and God. The whole focus for the Bible from the beginning, and certainly in the New Testament, is we and God. But my element, my part of we, is personal. It is individual. Versus, I'm part of a good church, so I must be okay. I come from a Christian family, so I must be a Christian. My husband or wife is a strongly committed Christian, so me and God, we must be good. No, my part of the we needs to be personal. It's personal but not private. That's how we need to think of it. My relationship with God is personal. It has to be, but it's not private. It's not just me and God. And he says, show the same earnestness. We desire that each of you show the same earnestness. Well, the same earnestness as who or what? The author doesn't say. It could be as they showed at the beginning. Maybe they started off very earnest. We're going to talk about what that means. And they've fallen off. Or maybe as the author has been calling for. What I've been saying over and over, show that same type of earnestness. Or it could always be Jesus. You know, that's the constant reference point of the author. Show the same earnestness that Jesus did. We don't know, but it really doesn't matter. Either way, show this earnestness, or as the New American Standard and NIV both say, diligence. Earnestness means seriousness and zeal in intention, purpose, or effort. Intention, purpose, or effort. I'm serious about it. Diligence is constant and earnest effort to accomplish what is undertaken. Persistent exertion of body or mind. I'm dedicated to it. I'm committed to it. I'm constantly working toward whatever it is my goal is. Well, think about it for a second. Does that describe your Christian life? Earnest, diligent, serious and zealous in my intention to live for Jesus? Constant and earnest effort to accomplish this life that Jesus has set forth? That's something we're going to think about some more. The author described it, now it brought to mind for me, the author described, a couple weeks ago we saw this, the Christian life as rest. Well, how do you balance, this diligent effort with rest? Well, even then, it's rest from the weariness of trying to earn salvation. It's not just rest where I sit back and do nothing, but I don't have to feel like, and what the Jews of that day and continuing, and really any other religion feels like, I have to earn my spot into heaven. I have to earn the love and favor of God. Grace is the hallmark of Christianity. There is no other religion that has true grace. Every other religion is based on my efforts to please God. That's what gets me into good standing. That's what will get me into whatever version of heaven they believe in. And so the rest is the rest from that. But you remember even back then, a few weeks ago, the author said you need to strive to enter the rest. You need to work hard to rest. You need to focus on, you need to know the truth, and need to be living out your faith so that you can experience and enjoy this rest of not having to earn your salvation. I don't have to earn it, but I do need to live it. I need to live out that faith. Any questions, any thoughts there? We'll go on in verse 11. And we desire each one of you to show the same earnestness, to have the full assurance of hope until the end. Let's look at that last part, assurance of hope. That's absolute certainty. Just hope or assurance, either one of those would convey that absolute certainty. The author's using both words. I want you to have the assurance of hope. And we've talked over and over, biblical hope is that absolute certainty. If God has promised it, it will come about. That's different. Faith is this general trust, confidence in God. Hope is when God has promised something specifically. I can be sure that's going to happen. And we should have that. We should have absolute, as he says here, the full assurance of hope, of heaven, of being saved now and spending eternity with God in heaven. Because realize this verse is not taken alone. It is in that phrase is in that same verse, show the same earnestness. If I know I'm earnestly and diligently seeking to live the life called me to live as a disciple. I can have that full assurance. Matter of fact, I should have that full assurance. If I have a faith that is evidencing itself, that is real. That if you have a faith that's real, it will evidence itself. What life did Christ call us to? If you had to summarize it, what would you say? You have to pick a verse that it seems like I use about every 3 weeks. Does this one look familiar? If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound very restful, does it? Carrying your cross. When you think of Jesus carrying his cross, on the way to Calvary, would you say, wow, he looks very restful there? No. Carrying our cross, that is an effort. That requires that earnestness, requires that diligence. But to experience the rest of knowing I don't have to earn my way into heaven. I don't have to earn God's love. That's what that rest is talking about, but this passage is focused on. I can have that hope, that full assurance of hope of not only the rest now, but what's waiting for me if I'm living this earnest, diligent life. Not perfect, we'll never be perfect, but fully committed. If I know that is true of me, then again, I should have that full assurance of hope, expectation of what is sure and certain. So, and then 12, so that you may not be sluggish. And so he's talked about earnestness. Now he gives the opposite here. What is sluggish? Lazy. That, the NIV. Were you cheating? No, I know you're a King James person, so you weren't cheating. Because the NIV has lazy, and that's a great description of what it is. Yeah. It is indisposed to action or exertion, lacking in energy, slow to act. Now, we all have moments like that. We're sort of right there right now. You know, if Lisa's a little quiet today, she's taking care of a baby goat every few hours, including during the night. There's a reason that people at age 60 don't have babies, but she's going to get around the system and have a baby goat and have to do the same thing. So there's moments when we're all indisposed to act. But that shouldn't be true of our Christian life. That should not characterize us. Lacking in energy, slow to act, indisposed to action. And he says, so that you may not be sluggish, instead, be imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. In other words, be like the believers who are going to fully experience salvation. Who is that specifically? Who's he talking about? We don't know exactly. It seems to be looking ahead to the heroes of the faith in chapter 11. He's going to talk about some people who, they lived out their faith to the full, exactly as you would expect. They had faith. When they were faced with choices, they made the faithful choices. They did the faithful things you would expect. And he's about to cite one of them. It's going to be a central figure in chapter 11, and he's going to talk about him now in just a second. And he says, be imitators of those who through faith, I talked a lot yesterday, so my voice cracked some. Faith and patience. Faith is belief in action. It's not just mentally, I believe something's true, but I act on it. And it's doing what our belief should lead to. You know, it's things like avoiding sin, obviously. Doing what is right, spending time with God, encouraging others, being a witness, all of those things. Not worrying, having peace, having joy. That's what it means to live out what I say I believe. I believe there's a God. I believe He's in control. I believe He loves me. Those things should come about. There's elements in our faith of surrender and reliance. God, I know what I believe about you is your God, and I'm not. So I need to surrender to you and your will. I need to rely on you and your plan, because it's got to be better than mine, as much as I like mine. Patience. Not just waiting without complaining. You know, around here we get stuck when a train comes across the tracks, don't we? And you know, that's tough enough. When it stops, that really tests your patience, doesn't it? You know, as long as it's moving, you got some hope. That's not all that the word patience means. It's not just waiting without complaining. The good old King James has long suffering. Long suffering. Other translations have forbearance. Bearing with. Enduring. And what does that imply? If you are enduring, what does that imply? What kind of things do you endure?
Not fun stuff.
Yeah, not fun stuff. You know, I never say, well, I endured eating a pepperoni pizza and having Oreos for dessert. I endured that. No. You endure not fun stuff. Things you don't like, absolutely. Well, that's his patience. When things are coming about that are difficult, it's not just I'm not complaining. I'm enduring. I'm persevering through them with the faith. You know, you talk about how do faith and patience relate to each other. Well, if I'm truly surrendered to God's way and His will, His plan, including His timing, the part that we seem to like the least often, I will patiently endure. Why? Because I have faith. God, your way is best. Your way is best. So I will patiently endure. And then after that, after giving this basic idea, he wants to get even more tangible, and so he gives the greatest Jewish example of faith in action, of patiently waiting for a promise. So verses 13 and following. For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, Surely I will bless you and multiply you. And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes an oath is the final confirmation. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. So that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. All right. Verse 13 again, for when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself. I think that's funny. Again, you swear by some higher authority. Well, there is no higher authority but than God. So I swear by me. I'll do it. Saying, surely I will bless you and multiply you. Now, God made the promise originally to Abraham, Abram at the time, before his name was changed. But he repeated it at times. And the time that he swore, that he added an oath, was when he tested Abraham. You remember, Abraham's son had been born, Isaac, and then God said, I want you to sacrifice Isaac. And it was a test, and it was there, after Abraham passed that test, that God added the oath. It's not just a promise, it gives an oath. Well, and thus, verse 15, Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. Patiently waited. You remember how long Abraham waited from God saying you're going to become a great nation to actually having a son? 25 years. Yeah. He was 75 when the promise was made. He was 100 when it was fulfilled. His wife was 90. Sarah was 90. 25 years. That's a long time, isn't it? So he is definitely an example of patiently waiting. Now, was his waiting perfect? No. Oh, we know that he brought up this idea, hey, God, should I adopt my servant? God said no, and then the big mistake is he had another idea, and this time he didn't ask God, he just did it. And he had a son with Sarah's handmaid, Hagar. And so he wasn't perfect, but he endured. He persevered. He obtained the promise. He wasn't a great nation. He never saw a great nation come about, but he saw the beginning of it. He saw the son that God wanted him to have and what it would lead to. Verse 16, for people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes an oath is final for confirmation. That was the greatest form of assurance someone could give. Now, Jesus is going to talk about the New Testament. Don't break it down and say, if I only promise, then it doesn't really count. It's only if I swear it counts. No, but this is saying if you give that oath, then that is you saying there's absolutely, I confirm this is true. So, verse 17, when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. So God wanted to go that full distance in that culture, that mindset. I want you to know there's absolutely no wiggle room here. But in saying this, notice in verse 17 how the focus shifts. It goes from Abraham to the heirs of the promise. Well, the heirs of the promise. Obviously, the nation of Israel is included there. Nation of Israel was a fulfillment of this idea that you're going to become a great nation. Well, why did they need the guarantee of an oath? If it's for the nation of Israel and the promise was to become a nation, it had already come about. Well, what was the full promise? The full promise is, God said, and I'm going to put the verse up in a second, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. Well, then in Genesis chapter 12, it says, when they came to the land of Canaan, so obviously time had passed there, but when Abraham and his family came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At the time the Canaanites were in the land. So this land that God had promised was inhabited by other people. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So why was it still, as it says in Hebrews, that this promise, God gave an oath so it show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise? They had become a great nation. When did Israel become a great nation? When was the nation of Israel formed? Where were they when the nation of, I'm not asking for a date. I won't
Egypt.
take you that far. Egypt, and what was their condition?
Slavery.
In slavery. So here they are in slavery in Egypt, but God had promised you're going to inherit the land of Canaan. They needed that. They needed to be able to look back on that oath and say, are you really sure, God? Because it's not looking very good right now. We're not looking like we're a nation, but we're not too great in the sense of we own our own land. And so that promise, as the author is talking about there, verse 17 again. So when God desired to show more convincingly, and I want you guys to know for sure, to the heirs of the promise, the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. God gave that oath in Genesis 22 so that the Israelites, when they're in slavery in Egypt, and they're wondering, what's up, God? Now, there had been a time element, but you still have to think they were wondering. Like, they'll look back, okay, God, he not just promised it, he doubled down. He said, I swear by me, this will happen. Well, Israel became a great nation while in slavery, so they needed the hope of that promise. But was there more to the promise? Was there more to the promise God made to Abraham? And shake your head yes, because the answer is yes. Make a blessing through them. Genesis 12, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. Not just bless you, you will be a blessing. Then he goes in more detail. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. How will all the families of the earth be blessed? Jesus. And what specifically about Jesus? What did he make possible?
Salvation.
Yeah, spiritual salvation. So God makes a promise to Abraham. I'll make of you a great nation. That nation will inherit the land, but there was more to the promise. Through you and your descendants, this nation, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Let's talking about Jesus. Ultimately, through your nation, through the Israelites, Jesus will come, and Jesus will provide salvation for everyone. So every nation will be blessed. Who are the heirs of that promise then? Well, it's all believers. It's as Paul says in Romans chapter 9, as indeed, and he's quoting from Hosea, as indeed God says in Hosea, those who were not my people, I will call my people. Well, who were not God's people originally? Gentiles, anyone that wasn't a Jew. And he's saying, now they will be my people if they have this faith, because now the faith is the key characteristic. And so, going back again, all of this is to explain verse 17. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. So now, he's talking about there's application there. God gave that oath back in Genesis 22, not just for Israel when they were in slavery in Egypt and wondering, will we ever get to the land, but for us as believers, that we've got a promise. That Abraham, and through him, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. We've got that promise of that blessing, which God will unfold more and more. Well, verse 18, so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. The two unchangeable things, there was a little bit of dispute about that. It seems like he's talking about the promise of Genesis 12, where God said, I'll make you a great nation, and the oath of Genesis 22. So God promised, he made an oath. He said, it's impossible for God to lie. You can trust that. We who have fled for refuge. Who are we? Christians, yeah. And in what sense have we fled from refuge? Refuge from what?
Persecution.
Not specifically persecution. What have we fled from? We shouldn't flee from persecution. Sin. That's what we fled for refuge from. We fled to Jesus as refuge from sin, and not just sin, but the punishment due sin. the wrath of God that sin deserved. We fled from that. And so we are the refugees here. We fled for refuge so that we might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. Again, the Israelites needed the hope that comes from God's promise for inheriting Canaan. We need the hope for heaven. And especially, again, remember the situation for the writing of this letter, from what we can tell in parts of the letter, they were being persecuted. And when you're persecuted, especially, I think it's true today, but it was definitely true. We saw it at times in Jesus' ministry, that people thought basically you live a good life, you get blessed. You live a bad life, God doesn't bless you. Well, here they are. Is persecution a blessing? No. And so they're probably thinking it's definitely not the kind of blessing we associate with the word blessing. They're thinking, if we're not being blessed, if we're being persecuted, is God really with us? Are we saved? Do we have the hope of heaven? You wouldn't think if we've got this great God on our side, we'd be going through this. Now, the Bible made it clear, and in several places, Jesus made it clear, and other epistles made it clear, that is a part of the Christian life. But it's easy to get discouraged, and that's what they were doing. They were getting discouraged. We'd like to avoid this persecution, and maybe some rationalization, like, well, we must not, maybe it was a bad idea, to leave Judaism and become Christians. And so the author is saying, God has done this so that you might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us, the hope of heaven through Jesus, through Christianity, and what it offers. Any questions there? Comments?
The journey that we experience in our lives, we all hope that we can see Jesus come back, but it may not happen in our lives, but through our faithfulness and perseverance, even if we don't see it, the life we live reflects on our families, so they will live the same life and possibly see us coming.
Absolutely. This hope, and we could go into all kinds of detail. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about it a little bit. This hope that we have impacts us, impacts others. Linda.
And to look for that eagerly. Scripture talks about how we eagerly look for his coming.
Yes. Yeah. That eagerness. And what it means is to be not just eagerly, when you see the context, not just, boy, I can't wait till you come, Jesus, and you can get me out of here. But it's what I'm doing while I'm waiting. Yeah. Living it out. Well, then the author closes out this section, verses 19 and 20. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain. So he's saying our hope is a sure and steadfast anchor for our soul, something that, to hold us still amidst the storms. An anchor keeps the ship from being blown all over in the midst of a storm, or just being able to stop right where they want to stop. But the anchor's only as good as what it is anchored to, isn't it? It's only good if it catches on to something that is substantial enough to hold the ship in place. Well, it says here that this anchor is in the inner place behind the curtain. What was the inner place behind the curtain? The Holy of Holies. Remember, he's talked about that, and we've seen it in other places. You had the outer court, where anyone could go. You had the holy place where priests could go, but the Holy of Holies was where only the high priest could go, and only once a year, the Day of Atonement. And it was the place that represented the presence of God on earth. And so that's what he's saying. We have an anchor that goes into the most significant place an anchor could be anchored spiritually. The inner place, the Holy of Holies, where God's presence is. Where Jesus, verse 20, has gone as a forerunner on our behalf. What's a forerunner?
Someone who goes before.
Someone who goes before. Yeah. Who's he going before? Us. Exactly. This is saying we are going to be in the presence of God. Jesus is there now, anchoring our souls. We are going to be there. And then he closes out, Jesus having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So he finally gets back, the author, to the subject he started in chapter 5. And he had to take a little detour because they were dull of hearing. So he had to warn them, then he had to encourage them. Next week we'll get into this man Melchizedek. Well, we close it out. again, the way I like to go about it is, what have we seen? What were the subjects that we saw in this passage? And then we're going to break it down to what's the main subject and then what's the lesson for us that we can apply. Hope is definitely a big one. Yep. Diligence, yes. Earnestness versus what was the opposite?
Lazy.
Lazy or sluggish, yeah. What's that? Yeah, that would be another synonym. What else did we see in here?
That God made a promise that extends to us.
Yeah, the promise of salvation. God keeping, confidence in God keeping his promises. So he made them and we can be confident. A couple other words that came up were tied together, and then Abraham was the example of them. Faith and patience, yeah. So faith, patience, and then Abraham. So yeah, I look at those. I think those are the subjects. And then what you want to do to find the main subject is you look, what do all the others relate to in some way? Maybe they lead up to, maybe they stem from. And I think the overall, well, let me ask you what you think. What's the main subject that everything stems from in some way?
God is faithful.
God is faithful, but I don't think that's the main. I think that leads to it. Because God is faithful, God gives us promises that he's faithful to, and I think that leads to the main subject.
Don't give up.
Don't give up because we have the main subject. Hope. Yeah. And hope is, everything leads to hope. You think about it. We can have, why do we have hope? Well, because God has promised and God is faithful. What do we need for hope? We need to be earnest and not sluggish. Hope, how's it relate to my salvation? I don't see heaven now, but I can have hope of salvation, of heaven, again, because of God's promises, because I'm living out the life. So I think that the main subject here is hope. And everything else relates to that, explains to that. There's this focus on hope that God will fulfill his promise. And that's the key one. That's what undergirds it. That's how we can have hope. Because God is faithful, he will fulfill his promise that he has made, and he makes it clear. God made a promise. All the way back to Abraham, he was promising something to us when he said, I will make you into a great nation that blesses other nations. Through you, through what comes from you. And so we have this. How important is that hope to us? And here's my question. It's not how important is it to go to heaven. How important is it to have that hope right now to endure this life?
It's vital.
What?
It's vital.
It's vital. Is it?
So we can't endure.
Is it? We can't endure? You think Christians can endure this life without hope?
There's no reason to without hope.
They have no reason. Why not?
We can't, but.
Because there's no end, there's no end foundation. There's nothing like that anchor, no purpose. There's no incentive.
Okay. Incentive to do what?
To follow God and to trust that what He said will happen will happen.
All right.
The one thing I always have to do with this is explain to people that hope is not a verb in this. It's not, I hope God's going to save me. Hope is a noun. It's that one thing that we're counting on. There is a way out. And so.
A way out of what?
Sin and punishment.
Sin and punishment. But how's that, how important is it to have? All right, I trust in God, I live for God. If it works out, great. If it doesn't, not maybe.
Consequences.
Here's what I'm getting at. There's people who, you've heard of Pascal's wager? Pascal's wager basically said that, all right, we don't know for absolute certainty if there's a God. So, but it just makes more sense that you live for God, and that way, he's saying, and he said, if I get it right, I get to go to heaven. If you get it wrong, you go to hell. It says, so I haven't lost anything. Do you think Paul would have made Pascal's wager?
No.
No. Why wouldn't Paul have been okay with Pascal? If it's true, great. If it's not, no big deal. Why wouldn't Paul have made that wager?
No faith.
No.
Well, he said true, then, like, I'm the biggest fool.
He said, we're of all men most to be pitied. Why would Paul say that? What do we know about Paul?
He gave everything.
He gave everything. Tell me specifics. What's a passage in the Bible? I've gone through beatings. I've gone through stonings. I've gone through shipwrecks. I've been, without food. You think Paul would say, well, if it wasn't true, no big deal. I'm glad I did it anyway. Now, my point is, here's the point I'm making. If we are living the Christian life with earnestness, then it's hard and we need hope. If we're living the Christian life sluggishly, it's no big deal and whatever. You see the difference? There's no way in the world Paul would say, if it's not true, whatever, glad I did it. He'd say, man, I wasted my life. I went through all this for nothing. It's because Paul was living it earnestly. If we live a Christian life that's earnest, we will face opposition. We will face persecution of some kind. It might not be from the government at this point, but there will be opposition from Satan. It will be a difficult life if we're living it earnestly, and we will need hope to cling to. If we're being sluggish in our Christian life, probably not much opposition to it. And so hope isn't as vital. Yeah, I want to go to heaven, but I won't be clinging to it. Like these people, the author needed to awaken that hope. Like, I know you're being tormented, you're being persecuted, you have the threat of punishment, of jail, of death. I've got to, reawaken if you don't have it. I've got to bring about this sure hope in you so that you can endure what you're facing. If we don't live an earnest life, though, we don't need that hope as much. And it goes back to, if we don't live the earnest life, we don't have that hope as much. Paul's warning, remember, this encouragement came after a warning that if you just believe in your mind only and don't live out that faith, he says, man, that's a dangerous place to be. Not because God looks and says, do you have enough good works? He says, do you have a legitimate faith?
That's
Questions
not
or-
American Christianity today.
That's not Christianity today in America.
Because we want it to be easy. We want it to be
Comfortable.
everybody's happy, everybody likes
But what I say, what are the two things that incline people to draw back from God? Persecution and comfort. You see throughout history, both of them made it tough on Christians. Yeah. Bob.
God continues to bless the Jews, even in this time in world history. In verses 7 and 8, it talks about that. And after World War II, the United Nations gave the Jews a homeland, and what they gave them was considered a worthless area, and they've turned it into the most productive area of the whole Middle East.
Well, I wouldn't say verses 7 and 8 are talking about the land of Israel. I realize it says land, but I believe it's a metaphor. His whole section here, there was nowhere he was saying, here's what's going to happen to the nation of Israel. He's talking about, as a believer, if your life is fruitful, you'll be blessed. If it's not, you don't have that assurance from God.
When you get to chapters 9 through 11, though, it will.
Well, we'll see. We'll see when we get there.
The other thing I was thinking of is that we don't understand the wrath of God. I mean, that ought to put a fear into us, and a fear of God, of what His potential is and where we're headed if we don't change our ways.
Absolutely.
Living out the life, but it isn't just in fear all the time, as you've been brought out. It's a way of life.
But it needs to be that underlying. If I were to say to you, God is blank, how would you fill that in? Love. Oh, yeah, everyone, but God is love. Because the Bible says God is love. You know what the Bible also says? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Well, that's just reverse order. God is love. Holy is God. And holy is that part of God that's separate from sin. And out of that, again, there's two sides of God. There's His love and His holiness. Grace, patience, all that flows from love. Wrath flows from holiness. And the wrath of God is a real thing. that will be meted out upon unforgiven sin. Yeah, so we have forgotten that, because we've just turned it, God is love, God is love, God is love. If you think about it, it says God is love, it says holy, holy, holy. 3 times it says holy, holy, holy is God. So we can't forget that part, or we will have the wrong view of God. Now, if we just only do that, we'll have the wrong view too. All right, well, let's do this, the final application today. Where am I on the scale between earnestness and sluggish? You had to put those 2 ends, and you had to place a mark somewhere between them on the scale. Where am I on the scale between earnestness and sluggish? Am I satisfied with where I am? I think, yeah, I'm doing pretty good there. That's good enough. Now remember what we said about being satisfied and good enough. You can't stand still. If not, what is one thing I can do to be more earnest? Earnest is that word we talk about. It's diligence. It's, it's commitment to action. But there has to be some specifics there. It's, okay, what's the action I'm committed to? What is one thing I can do? What's one change I can make if I am striving to be a little more earnest, a little more diligent, to live out this faith? Once again, God loves you no matter what. As a believer, there's not some days where he's like, oh, man. You can't be disappointed if you know what's coming, can you? Isn't that what the definition, part of the definition of disappointed? Means I thought something was going to happen and it didn't. Well, God's not up there, I thought he was going to do better than that. No, God knew all along I wasn't going to do better than that. I'm not saying he liked that, but he wasn't disappointed. And his love doesn't go up and down. But we are to live out this faith. We are to lay down our life daily, take up our cross. What's one thing I can do to be more earnest? Give that some thought now. For the rest of the week, take one thing with you.
Study to be more.
You certainly need to study so you know what some of those things are, don't you? And to give you a little bit of the foundation, because here's the thing to remember, it's not easy to do whatever it is. Earnestness by its very nature, it's not an easy thing. Lazy's easy.
If you think about it, life is like climbing a ladder. Each step up is an accomplishment. And if each step up helps us to build our faith, then we need to be diligent about studying the God. We have to be diligent about studying God's word and stepping out when we're too afraid to do so.
Well, that might be the specific for someone. Maybe my way to get earnest is, okay, I'm a little bit nervous, a little bit afraid. I'm going to do this thing. Yeah. Think of the earnest thing for you. Take that with you.
But you have to make sure your timing is in God's will, because there's examples of waiting all through the...
There's waiting, but usually waiting is this idea of waiting for something that I want to happen. There's never an example of waiting to do something God wants me to do. Now, there are people who didn't do it, who did wait. That's not the good waiting. Like, I'm waiting to read my Bible. No, the timing for that's always right. I'm waiting to have a prayer time. The timing for that's always right.
And another thought is to wait on the Lord.
Yep.
Sometimes if we first do something without taking it before him.
And that's where this earnestness will apply, is I need to wait on God and his timing. I need to be earnest in my faith that God knows better than me. Patience. I need to be earnest in my patience. So yeah, there's things we need to wait on, but it's always waiting on God to act in some way, not waiting on me to do the things God has told me to do.
When you look at Abraham, who he's talking about here, God told him to go. He told him to leave his father's house. He had all sorts of things there he told Abraham to do that Abraham didn't do. He waited before he left. Waited till his dad died. And then, well, he
went a little ways,
He
yeah.
went halfway, and then he sat there and waited for his dad to die.
Mm-hmm.
And then he took Lot, who was part of his dad's family, with him, which got him into all sorts of trouble. And all of the things that God told Abraham to do, a lot of them he really didn't do, or didn't do very well, or very thoroughly, or immediately. And he is still remembered here in Hebrews as the father of the faithful. And God just, He knows us, and His expectation, I think, isn't really near as high as sometimes we think it is.
Right.
And He still calls Abraham the father of the faithful. So Abraham was a normal person, and this idea, sometimes we get this idea that we gotta be some kind of a special person. Abraham was just a normal guy.
He was.
And God still put him in that position and still blessed him, even with all of his shortcomings. And if that don't give you hope, you
Yeah.
know, I don't know what would.
Yeah, you definitely see all the mistakes, sins of Abraham. But he grew from them. As it went, he grew and got to the point of Isaac. You think about it. That's the ultimate test. He couldn't have passed that initially. But God got him ready for that. Yeah. God will work with us if we're workable. All right, great. Let's close with prayer. Lord, thank you. Thank you for knowing us, for understanding us, for you being patient with us. Thank you for loving us all the time, no matter what. I pray that motivates us to live this life for you. Pray it motivates us to seek to be more earnest in living out our faith and encourage each other to do the same. Lord, it is not difficult. If we are living an earnest life, we need the hope of heaven, because this life will be difficult. It will be tough in various ways. And so, Lord, again, give us that hope. Give us the zeal that leads to that hope. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, let's sing.